All the way to the meeting, I was looking left and right, and behind me, I was afraid of being seen.
The Israeli who initiated the meeting was waiting for him. He was an academic with unofficial connections to Israel's new labor government.
It was a moment of truth. Meeting a PLO man was against the law.
The Israelis' cover for meeting a member of the PLO was provided by a fellow social scientist from Oslo.
I simply suggested that Hirschfeld and myself had breakfast, and then that when Abu Allah arrived in the lobby, I should simply discreetly slip away from the table and Abu Allah should take my place.
We spoke about the conflict, which had no end in sight. It had been raging for the whole century. So how could we end it?
PLO headquarters in Tunis awaited his report.
Abu Allah told us what had happened. I said, if they ask you to go again, go. He asked, what's the point of talking to these people? I said, well, there must be something behind it.
At the same time, official peace negotiations begun in Madrid continued in Washington, where a delegation of West Bank Palestinians were getting nowhere. Bypassing the delegation to talk directly to the PLO was thought by some Israelis as a better way around the impasse. But even the PLO did not speak for all Palestinians. The fundamentalist group Hamas had just kidnapped an Israeli police officer and murdered him.
We have to take a measure that will speak not by words, but by deeds.
Rabin ordered Israeli security forces to round up and deport 415 Hamas activists. The expulsion from the West Bank created a crisis in Washington.
If they do deport the Palestinians this morning, then I don't think the Israeli delegation tomorrow morning will find a Palestinian delegation to negotiate with. The public opinion at home was, boiling. It was so volatile that we knew we couldn't proceed with the discussions, with the negotiations.
The Palestinian delegation walked out of the Washington talks. Arafat now had no links to the Israelis. He sent for the Norwegian social scientist who had set up the secret breakfast in London.
Arafat told me that the talks in Washington were completely stuck, and that was why he felt there was a need of a back channel, and thought that the research institute in Oslo, which I was heading, should be the sort of front organization for the talks, because both the PLO and Israel needed deniability for having such talks.
The fish was hooked, and they were off to Oslo.
We were nearly arrested when we landed. We didn't have visas. Nobody met us. Instead of being treated as VIPs, we were grilled for 2 hours by the Norwegians.
We had to be so careful that we did not even inform the Norwegian secret police about their arrival.
Abu Allah, with 2 fellow Palestinians, was driven through the snow to a country mansion near Oslo. Here, he and the Israeli professor got down to business.
I said to Abu Allah, we must focus on topics where agreement is possible. We must put to one side subjects we know we can't resolve.
In dispute were the Palestinian territories ruled by Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. and most disputed of all, Jerusalem.
I said, we won't agree about Jerusalem. He talked about Palestinian control of the entire West Bank. I said, listen, we won't agree to that. Let's focus on Gaza first.
Every Palestinian was suspicious about Gaza first. The Israelis wanted to get rid of Gaza. For them, Gaza was just a factory of problems and the Intifada.
Back in Tunis, after the first Oslo meeting, Abu Ala voiced his concern about the idea of Gaza first.
Abu Mazen said, if any Palestinian land is offered, we should take it. Why reject Gaza?
Then Arafat said, I want Jericho as well. I asked him, why Jericho? He said, to get a foothold in the West Bank. Gaza is a dead end, but Jericho leads somewhere.
Jerusalem, the Israelis' capital, had always been claimed by the Palestinians as their capital too. The PLO indicated that they now saw the wisdom of deferring their demand. But Israel's prime minister had not yet been told about the Oslo talks.
It's pointless talking to Arafat and the PLO. The only Palestinians we deal with are the delegation in Washington.
The foreign ministry decided it was time to tell Rabin about the secret back channel. Though skeptical, Rabin thought it could be useful. The Palestinian delegation was still boycotting the Washington talks, and he was determined to force them back to the negotiating table.
We had orders for the next session in March. As we left Oslo, we told Abu Ala we wouldn't be coming back unless the Washington talks were resumed. It was an ultimatum.
Arafat now had to resuscitate the Washington negotiations. He summoned Hanan Ashrawi and her colleagues to tell them they must go back.
He said, we cannot afford to pay the price of walking out.
Don't live in your small worlds. You want to be the heroes. You are considering only yourselves. You don't consider the Palestinians, 6 million Palestinians. You don't consider the peace process. If you don't go, you break the peace process, you break your people. Come on, get down to earth. And he stood up and he left us. He walked on us. So we followed him to the other room. He was so furious.
Abu Ala told me later, you really set the cat among the pigeons. Arafat and I had to talk the whole Washington team round. He said they were all against going back. We couldn't tell them why they had to. We gave them lots of reasons, all completely fictitious.
We came back by clear-cut orders from Yasser Arafat. Go.
Soon afterwards, Israel's Oslo team brought home a draft which the two sides called a Declaration of Principles.
They came back very excited and said, we have a draft. It was obviously still rough, but they said, look, the PLO are willing to play ball.
But with the Washington talks resumed, Rabin had no further use for the Oslo talks and ordered them suspended. The foreign ministry, desperate to keep them going, placed the Oslo Declaration before a lawyer Rabin trusted.
I thought that the document was lousy and needed to be started from scratch.
I said to him, look, the real breakthrough in Oslo is that the PLO have agreed to go one step at a time. This means that we retain Israeli control.
Yossi Beilin drove with his boss, Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, to see Rabin.
I was squeezed